Hey there, you lovely shedsters. Welcome. It's great to have you here once again in the Holy Shed. And I hope that you're well and that you're having a wonderful weekend wherever you are. Here in the UK, we are hoping to stretch summer out a little bit longer. Always grateful for a bit more sunshine, a bit more vitamin D. And it looks like this week, we may be in for a few nice days, which take it when you can, I say. And summer always brings fun with it, doesn't it? And this afternoon here in our village in Somerset, there was the annual soapbox cart race, which is quite an event, really. You might think that's something for the kids, but actually it's kind of mostly grown-up guys who've made their own little kind of soapbox carts, and they just love to go heaving down. Well, I say that. It wasn't exactly Formula One, I can tell you. But anyway, it was a lot of fun, enough said. And you might have noticed that earlier on today I made a brief appearance on Songs of Praise. If you didn't see it, well, you can catch it on iPlayer on the BBC if you wish. Songs of Praise is not exactly my natural kind of home territory, but it was lovely to take part and I'm grateful for the opportunity. And look, I think that you'll agree with me that there is always an appetite for Vincent van Gogh. And so that's who we were thinking about last week, and given the messages and the comments that I had, I just wanted to show you that I'm responsive to popular opinion, and we're going to continue a little bit more with the great man. And this painting, this is a self-portrait, which is, I think, it's one of my favourites. I think it's my favourite self-portrait by Vincent. He painted it actually for Gogh, his painter friend, and it's him being seen or portrayed here as a Japanese priest. There was a little period he went through when he really loved a certain kind of Japanese painting, and he saw Japanese priests as people who were devoted to the contemplation of the mysteries of existence and living in harmony with nature and all that kind of thing, which he quite fancied. So there you go. And last time I was yakking on really about his religious upbringing, wasn't I? And his longing to follow his dad and his granddad into the ministry of the Dutch Reformed Church, which, it has to be said, ended in disaster. He studied theology, but sadly he failed the entrance exam to the seminary. So, that was a bit of a brick wall for him there. So instead he became a missionary to poor and quite destitute in many cases miners in Belgium. And when he saw the plight of these dear people, he sold just about everything that he had, including his preacher's suit, to help the miners and make their life a little bit easier, which they were all very appreciative of. But as a reward from the church authorities, they fired him. They fired him, can you believe it, for being overzealous and also for being undignified, scruffy. Well, he'd got rid of his preacher's suit, hadn't he? But, here's the thing. Contrary to many historians and commentators, Vincent didn't abandon God or faith through these events. I mean, yes, he turned his back on church and organised religion, but he didn't turn his back on God. Instead, he discovered new avenues to explore and practice faith. And today I want to focus on one aspect of this, which is his passion to redefine faith, to adapt it to the modern world, to the world he lived in, which for me makes him a hermeneut, which isn't a hermit. A hermeneut is a practitioner of hermeneutics, something I aspire to myself. Someone who reinterprets faith in the light of new, evolving situations. But anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Van Gogh grew up within a renegade branch of theology in the Dutch Reformed Church, which was known as Groningen theology. Groningen? Forgive me, Dutch people. It's a sort of liberalism, really, that was deeply Christological, focused on Jesus, but was more about praxis than orthodoxy. It didn't bother much about dogma, and in fact really kind of had some quite revisionist doctrines. But their focus was on the practice of Christian faith. And while Vincent fell out of love with the Dutch church, the basic instincts of Groningen theology remained with him and was part of him throughout his life. In his more kind of evangelical stage, which he did go through when he wanted to convert people, he told his brother Theo to destroy all his books except the Bible. But later, he changed his mind, and his faith became more existential, if you will, than evangelical. It was focused on what he saw as the central ethic of love. And this echoes the Groningen theology, which taught that divine goodness is present in all human beings and it's expressed through love. For a while, Vincent lived in London as an art dealer, and this period was an important part of his spiritual journey. He moved, we understand, between at least 6 denominations. You know, he was a bit of a sort of try 'em all kind of person. And he said, in every church I see God, and it's all the same to me, whether a Protestant pastor or a Roman Catholic priest preaches. It's not really a matter of dogma, he said, but the spirit of the gospel, which I think, you know, put him pretty much on the right lines, really. And, you know, I find it quite extraordinary that at exhibitions of Vincent's work, like the one in London at the moment, very little is ever mentioned about his faith, other than perhaps as this sort of passing, rather quirky thing that he went through. Most historians and critics prefer to interpret him turning his back on the church as signifying a rejection of religion and God per se. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was really the hypocrisy, as he saw it, in the church that turned him away from the institution, and of course the appalling way that he was treated by church authorities. You know, I think it was good reason to turn away from it. Faith wasn't a straightforward thing for Vincent. I mean, not at all, and you wouldn't expect it to be in such a man as this. But I believe that his entire life as an artist, and also just as a human being, can be seen as an honest search and struggle for a truthful faith. I think that is, from my perspective, the really important story of Vincent van Gogh, that he went out on an honest search and struggle, and all the other things, his painting and lots of things you see there, this is what's channeled through all of them. I think he was a black sheep, you know, and a prodigal. I think you see what I'm doing there. He was someone who was basically an honest seeker, and therefore conformity, whether that was to the conventions of art or the conventions of religion, were never really a big part of his consideration. I mean, clearly nature was massively important to Vincent's faith. I mean, that's pretty obvious in his work, isn't it? But I think it's wrong, as some people do, to therefore see him as a pantheist, someone who believes that God and nature are one and the same thing. He was more of a panentheist. We've talked about this before in the Holy Shed, haven't we? That little word en, or in the middle, makes all the difference. He was someone who saw God as a presence in everything, and that everything was in God. And, you know, this is how it seems to me, reading his letters and looking at his work. I think Van Gogh found God everywhere, but especially in the natural world, but also in ordinary people, and especially the people, you know, who, like the miners and people working in the fields and so on, ordinary labouring people, and also in everyday life. In all of these things, Van Gogh was constantly aware of the presence and the revelation of God. And I think this is very evident, as I say, in all of his pictures. But let me just show you one in particular, which is called The Sower. Now, it's interesting, you know, he painted over 30 versions of The Sower. And, you know, this is clearly a big story in the repertoire of Jesus, isn't it? The parable of the sower. And I think that was a huge part of where Vincent was coming from with these paintings, added to which this was the landscape that was all around him. And Vincent said in one of his letters that the colour yellow itself often implies a divine presence. Now, that's important. I mean, just think about that. when you look at so many of his paintings which are bathed in yellow, that he himself said that it often implies a divine presence. And so according to this comment, I think Van Gogh's world was jam-packed with divinity. You can see the crows flying over the field here, and some people see the crows in Vincent's paintings as a symbol of death, which, you know, I think, I'm not sure I totally go with that, but it's not unreasonable. Vincent certainly had a very strong sense of the imminence of death, and ultimately he entered into it of his own free will, didn't he? But it was always a hopeful thing. Death was always a hopeful thing to Vincent, and this picture, I think, screams hopefulness, does it not? Wheat, of course, is a picture of new life, of resurrection. And death and resurrection are the constant themes in Vincent's work. The skies in this picture are filled with golden hopefulness. And totally central is the sun, of course, which I think he seemed to see the sun as a symbol of Christ. And of course, then right in front, at the front of the picture, there's this pathway that leads there, which to me, you know, it's a pathway through nature to Christ. It's almost like an icon, this picture, in the sense that it's an invitation. As you look at it, it's inviting you to journey here into the depths of nature, into the depths of the world, in order to discover Christ. I love it. I really do. I also love this version of the sower too, where the sun is huge here, isn't it? And it's over the sower's head, really rather like a halo. I'll say more about that in a moment. And the trees in the background look very much like church spires reaching toward heaven. Well, we know what he thought about churches. So, you know, to him, nature itself was a church. It was a cathedral, reaching, bridging. And so nature is the bridge between earth and heaven. And this, I think, is underscored by this amazing, beautiful tree right there in front of us in the foreground, which towers up out of sight. And it's a setting sun. All our days come to an end, Van Gogh is saying. All our days come to an end, but hope is all pervasive. Wonderful, isn't it? And let's return to the picture that we glimpsed last week, which is called The Potato Eaters. And it's actually Vincent's first major work, which, you know, followed his missionary endeavour with the miners. So this is before his Impressionism period with all its bright colours. And, you know, this is so different to that, isn't it? This is a kind of dark image here. And it depicts a working family crowded around the table for a simple meal of potatoes and coffee. And Van Gogh wrote that he had painted the figures in the dark colours of, I quote, a very dusty, unpeeled potato. And I think actually, you know, it was this work that really convinced Theo that Vincent should go and study art properly. And I think Vincent was, you know, I think he said that he was demonstrating his ability to create human figures here. But beyond the technicalities is this wonderful, glorious image. You know, I think that the scene is clearly got a Eucharistic implication to it, with a sort of ritualistic sharing of the food and drink among the people round the table. There's actually a small crucifix in that picture over to the left on the wall, which you can't see too clear here. And then there's this great unifying element of the whole picture is the light overhead with this warm glow across all of the figures. The lamp, I believe, was Van Gogh's symbol of love and recalls the light of the gospel, which he once brought into the huts of the peasants and miners. And Vincent apparently saw this later on in his life as one of his finest works. Absolutely stunning, isn't it? And the sense of the infinite in the mundane is something that pervades all of Van Gogh's work. His experience of the numinous or the sacred quality of everyday existence, that's what I see as the whole dominant theme throughout his painting career. And rather than choosing traditional images of religion, as most classical painters did, to express divine presence in the world, Van Gogh instead tried to capture the infinite in the commonplace subjects of day-to-day life. He explained this. He said, "I prefer painting people's eyes to cathedrals. I prefer painting people's eyes to cathedrals. There's something," he said, "in the eye that is not in a cathedral, however solemn or imposing it may be. A human soul," he said, "a human soul, be it that of a beggar or a street walker, is more interesting to me." And, most of Van Gogh's work is not explicitly religious, and yet I believe it's profoundly religious. But here's where the hermeneutical bit comes in. Vincent's faith remained intact, I believe, despite his problems with the church and his abandoning of many of the conventions that went with that. But he didn't want to follow other painters in how he expressed faith or how he depicted the divine. He wanted to find his own way, to find his own hermeneutic, his own interpretation. And Vincent's strong desire was to situate faith in the modern world, in the contemporary world, because for him, traditional symbols no longer spoke to people. And I believe that is so much more the case actually today in our world, and underlines the hermeneutical task that we as people of faith have today. And anyhow, for him, the whole world was packed with divinity anyway. And his painting, Still Life with Open Bible, is one of the most powerful examples of Vincent's synthesis of tradition and modernity. Now, it's an interesting picture because it's gone right away from, all those beautiful, bright nature pictures. The open Bible, the central kind of image in this picture, is taken to be his father's Bible, and in the background you'll see that there's an unlit candle symbolizing his father, whose life was only recently snuffed out. And the Bible is open at Isaiah. You can't see that too clearly here, but at the top of the page, the right hand page, it says Isaiah, and in the column it actually says 53. So he's at Isaiah 53, which some of you may be familiar with. It's the part where Isaiah speaks of the suffering of God's misunderstood, rejected servant who's despised and set aside. A man of sorrows, he says, who vicariously brings healing. And this, of course, is interpreted by Christians commonly. Whatever you think of that, it's interpreted by Christians as the figure of Jesus. And there's something about him doing this which tells us that Vincent identifies with this suffering servant in some way. And of course his life, in one way or another, was constantly overshadowed with suffering. But he doesn't look for religious truth only in the Bible. That's what this picture's so importantly telling us. So he combines it with the book in the foreground, which is Zola's novel, which translates as The Joy of Life, Joie de Vivre. A novel that isn't obviously joyful, actually, in its content, but can be seen, I think, as portraying Isaiah's suffering servant in modern form. For Van Gogh, this book depicted another Christ figure, an orphan called Pauline, placed in the care of a wretched, miserable, self-centered bourgeois family where she is betrayed and robbed and abused. And yet she remains a ray of hope in the household and an angel of love and charity in their poor fishing community. And Zola describes her as the incarnation of renunciation, the incarnation of love for others and kindly charity for erring humanity. So Vincent revered the Bible. Yes, that continued in his life. but not as, the inerrant word of God or something like that. For him, the Bible was a source of guidance, revelation, yes, but of moral and life guidance. But he also found that guidance in other places too, in art and literature and people. And he loved the work of people like Zola, but also, people like Victor Hugo, whose hero in Les Miserables, Jean Valjean, was another offbeat Christ figure in Van Gogh's estimation. And Vincent was a painter with a message. He was preoccupied with the purpose of life, and he loved other artists and writers who were on that sort of journey. And he found this, as I say, in all kinds of literature at the time and in the work of other painters, but also just in ordinary life in the community. Finally, the same hermeneutical instinct that I'm talking about in Van Gogh is seen in his remake of explicitly religious works by Delacroix and Rembrandt. And these are works that he painted in the asylum in the final bit of his life. Last week we looked at the Good Samaritan, didn't we? Which was it mirrored Delacroix's painting of the Good Samaritan, but also made changes to it, reconfigured it so that it becomes a quite dramatically different image of the Good Samaritan. And the Pieta is another remake of Delacroix, in which Vincent has inserted his own face as the face of Christ here. The Pieta is a sort of classic formulation. Michelangelo's sort of Pieta is the famous image of this, the sculpture, where the dead body of Jesus is lying in the arms of his mother. And as I say, Vincent has put his own face here, his own figure, into the figure of Jesus, perhaps as a way of saying both that he identifies with the suffering of Christ, but also that Christ is part of his suffering too. And instead of giving Jesus a halo, as so many artists of the time did, he surrounds him with beautiful yellow light there in the sky, signifying divine presence and love. And just bear that in mind, the comment that we got from Van Gogh earlier, that yellow often signifies divine presence and divine love. Rabbi Harold Kushner, who I've talked about in recent weeks, makes the point that the Pieta image portrays something, an event, that almost certainly did not happen. There's no indication in the Gospels that Mary held her son's dead body. So why does it move us so much? Kushner, a Jewish rabbi, obviously feels this. He says, why does it move us so much? The significance, he says, is not in any literalness of whether this did or didn't happen, but in the symbol that is encapsulated in this formulation. The woman in the picture is not Mary, he ventured, but God in feminine form, a God who grieves for her children when they suffer, who suffers with them when they are cruel to one another, when they hurt and kill one another, or when they suffer, say, from mental illness. Which is why I love the fact that Vincent, someone who did suffer from both epilepsy and also from depression, why he's placed himself there on behalf, as I would see it, of all who suffer from emotional and mental health problems. As I say, Van Gogh did suffer from some form of depression and also from a form of epilepsy. So perhaps we can see this picture as a sort of icon for all kinds of suffering. And just one last observation is the way that Mary is releasing. She's letting go of her son, which is different to the Michelangelo statue, where she's almost, with upturned hand, she's almost entrusting her son to the greater love pictured in the yellow sky above. Just as we all are invited to entrust our suffering and the suffering of those we love, the suffering of our world, into the hands of God. It's just wonderful, isn't it? Oh my goodness. And, I'm out of time. And I haven't got to the raising of Lazarus, which was the other picture that religious themed picture that he did in the asylum, and so much more that we could look at. Over the summer, we've tried to look at the Bible differently, but I think Van Gogh helps us to do this too, by saying, don't get stuck in traditional interpretations of the Bible or of life itself. Be a black sheep. Think for yourself. Allow yourself to wander, to be prodigal somewhat. Because you know what? God's down every road. Christ is everywhere. And despite his suffering imposed by others and to some extent by himself too, despite his glorious melancholy, Van Gogh calls me to celebrate Joie, the joy of life. So look, get out there and spend some time with Vincent. I hope I've prompted you to do that. Look online if you can't get to an exhibition, which most of us can't. And you know what? Don't even bother about what the critics say or what other people see in these pictures. Don't even worry about what Van Gogh saw in them. That's really not the point. Just let them speak to you. There's no right or wrong. It's all about reader response, or look, the way that we look and how it strikes us, how it resonates, what it speaks to us about. And it might be something different next week or next year to the way it speaks to you now. But most of all, dear friends, enjoy these paintings, these glorious paintings of Van Gogh. And this practice or this approach might just help us to read the Bible a bit differently too, when we stop being governed by and overwhelmed by the interpretations of preachers and writers and other people, and we just begin to allow the words and the stories to speak to us in the way that they resonate with us now. So we are going to say this prayer which I wrote earlier. And this is obviously the wonderful painting by Van Gogh called Eternity's Gate. God of pigment, brushstroke and blank canvas, God of gold crests, giraffes and dragonflies, God of kindness and love even in the midst of pain, help us to go out into your world with eyes wide open, celebrating the gift of life on this beautiful blue planet, the splendour of nature, art and poetry, the wonder of friendship and adventure, the constancy of daily opportunity, and the knowledge that nothing we can ever do will place us beyond your love. May we never grow so important in our own eyes that we overlook the humblest of earth's creatures, ignore the seeming insignificant details of daily life, take for granted the ones who make us who we are, or rush through moments and days without pausing to sense our feet on the sure ground of existence. And may we, with Vincent, daily understand the truth that the best way to know you is to love many things. Amen. Okay, well, with that we've come to the moment of our shed holy sacrament. So if you have a drink handy, I invite you to just grab it right now and join me in a toast. A toast to divine revelation wherever it comes, to divine revelation everywhere, but especially today in the paintings of Vincent van Gogh. It's a toast to all people who struggle in the quest of being true to themselves. A toast to you, dear friend, as you learn to stand up and say, here I am in the world, this is me. It's a toast to a toast to yellow and blue and green and red, to colours. May your life be colourful and beautiful. So it's a toast, dear friends, to life, l'chaim. And, well, there we are. If you like all this stuff, if you like what we represent here in the shed, you can support us by buying us a coffee or two using the coffee site. The link is always at the top of the posts on the Holy Shed Facebook page. And there it is. I think we're just about done, really. Let's see another picture for our blessing. I love this painting, don't you? Wouldn't you like to sleep in that bed? So, dear friends, the blessing of God, the eternal goodwill of God, the shalom and salam of God, the wildness and warmth of God, be among us and between us now and always. Amen. And I'm going to finish with a song. I don't know, if you're watching this on Facebook, I don't know if Facebook may just cut this out. If so, I will put it as a separate link that you can go straight to after this. But this is a song by a lovely friend of ours called Chrissy. And Chrissy, she's just about part of our family, actually, as we have been part of her family. She lived with us for a while when we first moved to London. She was our oldest daughter Jenny's best friend. And she's grown up into the most delicious woman. And she sings like heaven's angels themselves. And she was moved to write this song about women trying to make a living on the streets. And she collaborated with something called the Anawim Women's Centre in Birmingham, also run by some friends of ours. Anawim provides support for vulnerable women, people coming out of prison or suffering mental health problems, trying to get back on their feet after drug abuse or whatever it is. It's a support thing for women, and that's what Chrissy's song is about. So enjoy this, and I'll see you very soon. Stay human.
every day, every night. every day I